First of all, I just want to thank Dr. Jill Cizek. She's just a, speaking of energy, an incredible force. And I'm so pleased that she's brought this topic to us today. So I think I know everyone here. I'm Allison Brashear, the Vice President for Health Sciences and Dean at the Jacobs School. And it's really wonderful to be bringing everyone together, to have a unified vision across all of our 6 schools of health. And here we're going to talk today about innovation and strengthening our health outcomes. And as I say often, we are here at UB to transform health of Western New York. That is it, plain and simple, and everything we do feeds into that. And so today we're going to talk about real world solutions with a collaboration across disciplines. Just today, this morning, someone was asking me about business entrepreneurship and an idea and patents, and I'm really excited that the Office of Business and Entrepreneur Partnership is here today. They've been an invaluable partner in helping our faculty and students move ideas from concept to commercialization. And in the current environment, commercialization is really critical, both for individuals as well as the school. The Office of Business and Entrepreneurship Partnership really plays a critical role in taking people from their ideas and making sure that it's actually doable and connecting them with others in the community and at UB that can and take technology and entrepreneurships and put it all together so that things succeed. I know personally when you put a lot of effort into something, but you don't have someone to get you from what we call valley of death in startups, it can be incredibly frustrating. So we're really fortunate to have the team here to help us navigate that. So Dr. Olga Petrov is going to walk us through what UB has today. She's the Director of Innovation Initiatives, and she has a deep experience in not only building researchers' relationships, securing funding, and then making sure, as I said, that they have a path towards true impact. And I know she makes sure that her groups don't go to the valley of death, that they actually get on the other side of that. She's a passionate advocate for innovation. She's a trusted partner. So today she's going to walk through SBIR and STTR 101, which is Building Translational Research in Tech Startups. And it's a very important mechanism at the NIH because they want to partner universities and startups to take technology, to take drugs, to take all multiple types of innovation therapies to the market and get that out to the patients, because that's what we're all about, is getting treatments, technology, devices out to the patients and out to our communities. So I know if you're just beginning to explore this, or you've been kind of put your toe in the water and need some more information, I think today's presentation is going to be really helpful. So I'm pleased to welcome Olga Petrov to the Zoom stage, and she's going to take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Brashear.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brashear, for that very generous introduction for me and for our office. And thank you, Dr. Cizek, for giving me the opportunity to speak, because both from the perspective of letting all of you know about our office and the resources that we offer and get connected with the larger UB medical innovator community, but also to help you explore pathways to bring your innovations from lab to market, from bench to bedside, as we say. And today, really, we're going to focus on that SBIR and STTR mechanisms. I do have to say that, as you know, we are in sort of unprecedented times right now with a changing, dynamic and uncertain federal climate. And a lot of the things that I will be talking about today as to how the SBIR and STTR programs work, this is the established procedures and frameworks for the SBIR STTR program. Things might be in flux, however they are going forward. There have been a number of awards that have been recently announced through our partners. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about this program. All right. And I have to do the obligatory, am I sharing the right screen? Does that look okay?
Yes, you are.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. So today we'll go through initially the introduction and the purpose of the SBIR STTR program, the program structure and basics, the participating agencies. So of course, with this group, the focus will be very much on NIH, but there are opportunities, very important opportunities at other agencies, especially again in this changing climate that you probably will want to consider if you are going for SBIRs, STTRs, the application process and the resources that we have here at UB and the greater ecosystem. I am going to try to make this interactive. So while I do my own intro, if you would like to participate in the polls, I'll have a couple of questions. It's not a lot throughout. If you want to join, and the QR code will pop up when we have when they have the questions later. But a little bit about my background. So I am a lab scientist by training, PhD in molecular microbiology, 10 years worth of bench lab research and postdoctoral fellowship with Roche. And I've been doing technology transfer and academic technology translation innovation work for about 7 years, including with the National Science Foundation Innovation Core Program, which is sort of a feeder into the SBIR, STTR programs across agencies. At UB, I specifically focus on working with our faculty founders and startups, focusing on those technology translation pathways. And I also am an SBIR, STTR reviewer. So will be coming from certain experiences at having been a panelist, a commercialization panelist. All right, so if we actually look at the program, I want to start off initially by every lecture I give right now, every presentation, I do want to remind researchers of the absolutely amazing, unparalleled impact that academic innovation has had on our society, on our economy. We're talking about from 1996, almost 2 trillion added to the gross industrial output. We're talking about millions of jobs created, hundreds of drugs, tens of thousands of startups formed, all coming from researchers and innovators such as yourself. And I wanted to, this is one of the first Slido questions. Do you know of any real world examples of products based on academic innovations? And if the Slido doesn't work, we might have to, if it's not working, we can also try the chat.
It is working.
Okay, it is working. I
Yeah.
see one person typing, but I also see things coming through in the chat. We have Gatorade. Yes, Gatorade was very much an academic innovation that did make University of Florida a lot of money. Vaccines, drugs, absolutely. All right. If you don't know, we'll get to this. You'll find out in a little bit. All right, anybody else? Okay, we have one more person typing. Many of the devices in medicine, yes. So if we actually look, as a matter of fact, 30% of the drugs that are currently approved and on the market were initially discovered in academic labs. So for example, Northwestern with Lyrica, starting in Northwestern, that was one of the biggest technology transfer deals ever, with Northwestern receiving over $1 billion from that particular deal. Of course, vaccines, COVID vaccine with Penn, Catalin Carrico, with her contributions to that. The other thing I really want to remind, and again, this is something that is getting buried a little bit in the messaging right now, but the NIH has contributed funding to 99% of drugs approved by the FDA from 2010 to 2019. So the contributions of NIH and academic funding have been absolutely astounding to the revolutionary treatments that we are seeing on the market today and in the clinic today, and they're transforming cancer care as well as a lot of other applications. Outside of the drug space, and a lot of these were funded by the National Science Foundation. So the Doppler radar, LASIK eye surgery, general AI. The MRI, by the way, that was our sister campus, Stony Brook University. The foundational work for the MRI was at Stony Brook. Duolingo, additive manufacturing, 3D printing, that was all funded by the NSF initially. The Honeycrisp apple came out of University of Minnesota, for example. So for that person who said they don't know any, but now you will have a better idea of the innovations that come out of the universities. However, that path from lab to impact, from bench to bedside, getting those innovations into the real world is a relatively long and complicated journey from lab to market that involves intellectual property protection, involves a lot of de-risking, clinical trials, investment. And as you have already heard, when we proceed from those original initial innovations, basic fundamental research that is done at the university with the funding mechanisms that you are used to, those funding mechanisms, once you start approaching translational research and that commercialization potential, they are not as suitable. They do not fund that work that really crosses into that translational applications. And of course, as a lot of you are aware, you do have to have that private funding, whether it is coming from venture capitalists, angel investors, or corporate investors, corporate partners, that brings that technology home to the market, to the clinic. However, majority of technologies will face that valley of death, where those two particular funding sources are not quite intersecting. And that is where the SBIR and STTR program fits in, and partially why it was launched by the federal government actually quite a few decades ago. So it was created by the Small Business Innovation Development Act of 1982. So the program has been around for looking at 4 decades. I feel old. And it was created to stimulate technological innovation, specifically through small businesses, including startups, and to also that dual purpose of also supporting the needs of the federal government. So procurement of the federal government, and really increasing the private sector development and translation of the innovations that you saw that were derived from federal R&D at universities and academic settings, and also to support the development and growth of US startups. And what's important here, again, to reiterate, if you're considering going for an SBIR STTR grant right now, because the federal funding landscape is becoming uncertain, because certain mechanisms are more limited in their funding, you still have to remember that the type of R&D development that happens under the SBIR STTR mechanism is really focused on translational research. So you have to have a product in mind. It has to be the end goal of it has to be the development of a product or service that can be commercialized either for the general American consumer or for the federal government. If you're looking to kind of fill the gaps in the funding that you have right now, not necessarily on translational side, SBIR, STTR is not the best mechanism for you. It really is focused on that technology commercialization. If you are thinking that, hey, I have an invention, an innovation, and by the way, if you do have something that is translatable and haven't spoken to my colleagues in the technology transfer office, including Tim D, definitely do so. If you already have, I see some of the names, I'm familiar that you have disclosures and have worked with the office. So if you do think that you have something that can have those real world applications, can become a product, can be commercialized, what are the advantages of going, other than, of course, crossing that valley of death? So the SBIR STTR program is designed to provide very early stage, high risk R&D funding for product development. This is the type of thing that most investors, unless you find someone who really aligns with your cause, an angel investor, most investors are not going to touch that. Most industry, and this is something I don't want to say common misconception. We will see how the dynamics change in the next year or two, because there's a lot of people that are saying that industry should step in, industry will fill the gap. That is uncertain whether they will. To date, industry has wanted to see product development de-risked through SBIR, STTR to a certain stage. So let's say if we're talking about new drug development, very often they will want to see a lot of preclinical animal work for both safety and efficacy, sometimes taking it to an investigational new drug so it's ready to go to the clinic. So SBIR, STTR provides the kind of funding that investors and very often industry are not willing to provide. Also, for startups, this funding is non-dilutive and has no strings attached. It's not a loan, no repayments. You do not get diluted out. You do not lose equity or ownership of your company. There's no royalty payback. And also, if you're successful with an SBIR, you do have increased chances of getting government procurement or contracts later on for those particular innovations. So to give you an idea of the types of companies that started with SBIR. So SBIR is very often you think of, hey, it's, you know, a small startup, they get some funding, maybe they get acquired, maybe they license their product, but some very big, well-known companies and products actually started with SBIR funding, including Qualcomm, Biogen, and Symantec. All of those received their first SBIR, I believe in the 80s and early 90s, and then Philips Sonicare, that was a startup that had that first prototype specifically for the Sonicare brush that received an SBIR that was later acquired by Philips. But you don't even have to look that far. You can look at our own successes here at the University of Buffalo, one of the probably most successful technology transfer cases that we've had out of the School of Pharmacy with Dr. Joseph Balthazar. His startup, which was launched, I believe it was 2018, it was before I joined UB, Epsutix, which was last year acquired by Merck in a deal that was worth over $200 million. Also had its humble beginnings with a small phase 1 SBIR award in 2021. So we have some great success cases, and we have other companies, startups out of UB that have received SBIR funding. I'm curious, on this particular call, has anybody ever applied for an SBIR STTR? And the options are, you've never applied, you may have not applied, but you've received a sub-award from a SBIR STTR, or you actually have a company and have applied. All right, I'm seeing 3 nevers, 5 nevers, 6. All right. I think I would imagine that, all right. So most people, well, it looks like almost everybody on here is here to learn about this, have never applied for a grant. All right. So with that, since everybody is new to this process, let's go over some of the basics of the program. So you heard the SBIR STTR. There is a slight, not a slight, there are quite a few differences, even though they fall sort of under that same umbrella. The SBIR Small Business Innovation Research grants are really focused on supporting small businesses in conducting translational R&D and moving their innovations to the market. The STTR, Small Business Technology Transfer Program, is really there to facilitate collaborations with universities and facilitate technology transfer. Does it have to be technology transfer? No. Is it something where it is absolutely required that university partnerships and expertise are used? Yes. So if we look at the SBIR, STTR differences, under SBIR, partnering is permitted. Under STTR, there has to be a nonprofit research institution partner. And I'll touch on this later, but this is something for you to consider, that even if you're not necessarily thinking of founding your own company, one of the things that I really encourage you to do, and our office can help support, is, are there startups? Do you have expertise that a startup that maybe UB spin out needs, or maybe another startup in the upstate New York or New York ecosystem or beyond, where you can partner with them and get a sub-award from them through an SBIR or an STTR. So in terms of the principal investigator, for SBIR, they have to be over 50% employed with a company. For STTR, they may be employed by the university. So if you have an invention, start a company, there are some agencies, including the NIH, and Buffalo, University of Buffalo allows this, not every university allows this. The PI and inventor from the university are allowed to be the same person. For SBIRs, you cannot sub more than 33% on a phase one or 50% on a phase two, and I'll talk about the phases. Versus an STTR, you have to absolutely have to, at a minimum, sub 30% to the research institution partner. So if you are a sub-award on STTR, at least 30% of that grant will be coming to you. Another thing to consider, if you have majority ownership by VCs already, which I don't think anybody in this group will, some agencies allowed for SBIRs, STTRs is not allowed, and you will see which more agencies participate in the SBIR program than the STTR program. The other thing you've probably heard is that SBIR program really goes from that learn to crawl and then walk and run, the 3 phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, and very quickly, phase 1 and 2 are the official phases that have solicitations. Phase 3 is really that commercialization, which is not official solicitations. This is when the government proceeds to procurement contracts with a very small select group of companies. So phase 1 is, and this is where, if you're interested, most of you will most likely be starting. This is really about the feasibility. Will your idea work? These proposals are 15 to 25 pages. The performance period is 6 to 9 months. The funding level is up to 250,000, although NIH sometimes goes above 300, and then you have smaller agencies that are below 100. And average success rate, depending on agency, is 10 to 15%. Phase 2, this is direct advancement from a phase 1 award. Most of the time, where you really do have to demonstrate work that is moving that innovation, that technology towards commercialization potential. It's much longer, 25 to 50 pages. Performance period is 24 months. 1 million average for a phase 2, but up to 2 million. And again, NIH is known to give bigger awards. And the average success rate here jumps up dramatically to 40 to 50% because these particular proposals, most of the time, are based on a successful phase 1. So you're kind of transitioning. But that also shows you that there is a certain amount of proposals after projects after phase 1 that do not advance to this stage, either because of technical feasibility issues or commercialization potential challenges. And if you look at this entire process from phase 1 prep all the way to your phase 2 award, this whole kind of life cycle in SBIR, STTR, successful grant that goes through both stages, we're talking about 3.5 to 4 years because you really have to take into account not only the proposal prep, which takes a significant amount of time, the awaiting period, as well as the contracting period if you're awarded. And this is something, again, these are the timelines. These are pre-2025 timelines. 2025 timelines might be even a little bit longer. So this is the kind of thing that, if you're really relying on this funding to come through to support someone, you have to be aware of, cognizant. This is what the timeline looked like before 2025. It might be delayed and a little bit longer now that we are here. So most people, when they start out, they go to phase 1 because you really need the lowest level of preliminary data to be competitive. And it depends on the agencies. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But there's also if you think that you have a significant amount of de-risking translational work that was already done in your lab, you can consider direct to phase 2 and fast track applications, which some agencies, it's agency specific, allow. So a fast track combines both a phase 1 and phase 2. You're submitting 1 application and 2. You have to do a lot more homework about the commercial potential, the market, what your commercialization regulatory path would look like. You have to know what would happen in phase 2, what are your go, no-go criteria after phase 1. Direct to phase 2 that some agencies have, basically, if you're saying that I have everything de-risk, I have all the animal preclinical data done, I have the safety done, or maybe you have some very small clinical pilot and I want to move into that phase 2, I don't need to waste the time, I want to go for the larger pot of money, it is possible to go to direct phase 2. work. Those are more risky, but it is possible to do those. And then I do very often get asked by startups about that phase 3, because if you look at all the resources, everyone says SBIR, STTR has 3 phases. Officially, it's really only a 2-phase program. Phase 3 is that commercialization phase. There are no specific solicitations. You will never be able to apply for this. This is either privately funded or it is non-SBIR contracts, procurement contracts with the federal government, if they were satisfied and very interested after the completion of your phase 2 work. It happens through the NIH translational programs, it happens through DoD acquisition programs, but if you try to look for actual solicitations for phase 3, they do not exist. And one more thing before we move on to the participating agencies for you to consider when you start thinking of applying, depending on agency, depending on solicitation, SBIRs, STTRs can be run as grants or they can be run as contracts. So majority of the awards that you are getting at the university, there are occasionally cooperative agreements, but most of the time they're grants. And grants, generally broader topic, investigator initiated topics. There's financial flexibility. If you notice that something technically changes in the project, you can adjust the scope. At the end of that particular grant, all you have to present is a progress report. Your product most likely has to go to commercial markets, and then that transition to the phase 3 funding is very limited. On the other hand, there's a number of agencies, predominantly the Department of Defense, that has contracts. And the topics are very, very narrow and pretty much defined by the agency. This is what we want to see. These are the types of solutions. Do you have something for us? You don't really have much flexibility. You have a predefined scope of work, and if you're failing, it's very likely that they can terminate that contract. For these really are later stage where the government will want to see a prototype delivered to them. The primary customer is the federal government. It's usually for dual use technologies. Yes, they can have commercial applications, but they have to have applications for the government as well. And this is where that phase 3 funding is available. So, having looked at that differences in the structure, let's look at the agencies that participate. So we have overall 11 to date, 11 agencies have participated. One of these agencies is in jeopardy right now as it is, but prior to 2025, you had Department of Defense, National Science Foundation, Health and Human Services, Department of Energy, NASA, EPA, Homeland Security, Education, Commerce, Transportation, and USDA. And the way that their participation in SBIR, STTR worked, if a federal agency has an extramural budget of over $100 million, 3.2% of that budget has to go to SBIR. And that's how we ended up with those 11 agencies. If their extramural funding budget is over $1 billion, they had to assign 0.45 to these technology transfer grants. And that is how we ended up with Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, Energy, NASA, and NSF being the only 5 agencies that do the technology transfer awards. The rest of them do not, and also because the rest of them have smaller budgets, when I was covering those amounts for phase 1 and phase 2 up to, those agencies are usually have much smaller pay lines. So something like EPA might have only $50,000 for phase 1 versus an NIH that could be going over $300,000 for phase 1. When you are considering, and I know a lot of you are sitting, so a lot of you are from, from medical background. You're working on medical innovations, and you might think, hey, let me focus on NIH. But I'm going to try to make a case that you should look outside of NIH, because I think you have great opportunities outside of NIH. And when you are thinking of which of the particular agencies to select, you really have to be aware of the fact that the R&D topics are going to be different, the award amounts, the timing of the solicitations and the awards. The review process is going to have certain differences, the success rates and the types of awards, the grants or contracts. So if we look at something that how the agencies differ on open topics, where it's a broad solicitation and you can come in and say, I have a medical device, this is what it is, versus something that is very, very much predefined as a solicitation. So NSF is one of the broadest. Of course, once you start getting into defense, they're the ones who are coming out with narrow solicitations for very specific devices they need, or very specific conditions that you do see in the military that are more prevalent in the military. NIH appears on here twice because NIH has both broad agency solicitations, and then the individual institutes will have narrow topic solicitations as well. The agencies also differ in the timeline. So once you do your research, and again, we are more than happy to assist. We're here to work with you if you want to pursue this, and we can go through the different timelines. Different agencies have multiple submission cycles during the year. Their timelines differ, so that is something that you have to consider. Also, in terms of the importance of the commercialization. So every single SBIR, STTR grant proposal will ask you about the commercialization potential, your first customer, what does your market look like, what specific industry pain point are you solving. However, in terms of how much those are weighted, it is also agency dependent. So for example, for NSF, and I've reviewed these where I've seen panels literally kill pretty decent technical grants because their customer segments, because their market understanding wasn't defined. NSF really prioritizes it. Versus if we are looking at something like the EPA, sometimes it's not as important for them. NIH is on here twice again, because NIH is that land of it depends. In a phase 1 NIH, the section is there, but the review panels don't really, it's not something that is a big scoring criteria. Once you move to a phase 2 award, there's a separate 10-page commercialization section that you have to submit for NIH. And that's when for NIH commercialization becomes very, very important. And there you go through, again, everything in terms of the indication, number of patients, your intellectual property, your commercialization plan, regulatory approach. So that becomes a lot more important. Another thing that you want to consider is what are the budgets for the various agencies. So the biggest budget for SBIRs, STTRs is from the Department of Defense, followed by NIH, DOE, and then NSF, and then NASA. So those are the biggest funders. Those are the ones that have the most funding. If you look at DoD, and I really do encourage you to, if you are going to pursue the startup route, or if you're working, let's say if you're working with a startup partner who is going to have a subaward to you and you're in the medical space, really look at the DoD. They have a very large budget. They often have solicitations in the medical space. Their success rates for phase 1, as you will see, is one of the higher ones, 25 to 28. The other agencies are running in the 10% or lower. And the DoD has multiple offices, naval research, you have so Navy, Army, Air Force, and then other agencies such as DARPA, and all of them will have specific solicitations, and they will have solicitations in the medical space. Similarly, NIH, so under Health and Human Services, you have NIH, CDC, and FDA. Under NIH, almost all of the institutes to date have participated in the SBIR STTR program, and this is where you do have those differences come in terms of the broad versus narrow topics. Sometimes you have a broad agency, an NIH agency solicitation, where if you have something that could apply to multiple institutes, you might choose an institute, it might get bounced to another institute, but then you will have very specific institutes have predefined solicitations as well, that topics that you might want to look at. And in terms of NIH, for this particular audience, you might be wondering, am I too early to go for an NIH SBIR? So if we look at, let's look at drug development, we're talking about basic research, discovery, target identification, initial testing, preclinical animal models, when you have your IND, investigational new drug filing, going into clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2. So the data appears to indicate that the majority of SBIRs that the NIH has funded in recent years, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure how well the contrast is coming through, but I'm putting like right here, the largest percentage has been in the preclinical space. You do have some funding going towards clinical projects. There is some funding. So if you're in that discovery phase, depending on the institute, you might still be able to get an SBIR, STTR from the NIH, but your best chances are if you're in that preclinical space where you've moved into animal models. So that was for the NIH, but I also would strongly recommend that you look at the NSF. Yes, their budgets are smaller, but they're one of the startup friendliest agencies. So first of all, 92% of their awardees have less than 10 employees. 87% of their awardees have never received an SBIR from any agency. 78 of their awardees incorporated in the past 5 years. And as opposed to all of the other agencies, NSF has what they call a project pitch, where you submit pretty much 1 to 2 page summary. This is what I'm thinking. And NSF will come back to you and say, yes, this is a fit for us. No, or here are the problems. No other agency, while you absolutely should talk to the program officers, program directors about the fit, no other agency will do that when you actually formally submit a summary of your project and tell you whether or not it is a fit. Having said that, more and more people are discovering the NSF. So the first time success rate is now in the 10 to 15% range. But another thing that I really wanted to point out here are all of the various topics that the NSF SBIR program is sponsoring. And as opposed to that preconceived notion in academic basic research, yes, NSF, if you have human health applications, you probably should not be applying. If you have human health applications in your early stage startup, NSF has biological technologies, biomedical technologies, digital health, medical devices, pharmaceuticals. And I think I'm also missing, and maybe missing, there is something in terms of diagnostics. So they have all of these divisions and focus areas specifically for SBIRs, STTRs, and human health applications can apply to the NSF. And the distinction really, if you think about it, between NSF, NIH, and DoD for health applications, biomedical applications, NSF is really focused on that deep tech innovation, not clinical. They usually don't like disease specific. So if you have something that could apply to multiple diseases that you haven't really selected your first indication, you have multiple use cases, you don't necessarily have that initial preclinical animal data, animal models yet, you're probably good to go to the NSF. On the other hand, if you have a very narrow disease-specific indication, you're already running animal trials for that one specific indication, you are looking to potentially go into clinical trials or do some regulatory work, then you want to go to the NIH. And then if you do find that you're working on something that might have applications for the DoD or one of their solicitations aligned with the type of disease area that you're working on, definitely check out the DoD solicitations. And to give you an example here, so if you have a new therapeutic that can have applications across multiple solid tumors and you need to do some med chem de-risking, initial testing, probably NIH, or if you have a drug delivery platform, NIH will be good. If you have something that is already set for pancreatic cancer, you're working in animal models, go to the NIH. If you have a predefined indication specific to military populations, your path is then going into the DoD. And here's an example of where that playing the numbers game is very important. So if you look, and this is courtesy of IntelliSpark, a grant rating firm that we work with. They have a lot of great data on this, and we can also refer those who are interested to them. So NIH challenge grants, they had $200 million budget, 200 projects. DoD Operational Medicine broad agency announcement had 100 million, 100 projects. So you would think that, hey, I probably have a better chance if I go to the NIH. Well, NIH received 24,000 applications for 200 spots versus the DoD one received 800 for 100 spots. So you were talking about a probability of around 1% versus a 12.5% probability of getting an award. And not to not to discourage anybody from applying to the NIH, but NIH is one of the most competitive. The trend has been for that first, even phase 1, phase 2, and fast track, they have been, the success rates have been going down. With the last year was the first year that the overall phase 1 success rate in NIH hit below 10%. And it is anticipated that in this particular climate, between the budget issues as well as more people going, that they probably will go down even further. And this is why it's really important to look at those NSF and DoD solicitations as well. Also, of course, which institute of the NIH you look at is also an important consideration, because NCI, NIAID, NHLBI all have larger budgets. But then, so let's say NCI, they might have a larger budget, but in terms of the competitiveness and the success rate, for example, NCI is one of the most competitive SBIR phase 1 institutes because of how many applications they get. And here's another statistic from IntelliSpark. This looks at really the response of the world, of the changing academic and tech development world to the events around us. So this was the number of NSF project pitches as they increased when the pandemic started in 2020. So there is currently an anticipation that because of everything that is happening, because of that shift towards relying more on industry and translational work, that this might be the case as well, where more that all the agencies will be seeing more proposals. But this is why it's also very important to consider which institute, which agency, are there DoD applications that are aligning with what you are working on. So if we look quickly at the application process, this is one of the things, you absolutely have to have a startup. You have to have a company. The applicant for an SBIR has to be a for-profit organization that is organized in the US, has a principal place of business in the US, and all the SBIR funded work has to be done in the US. Previously, you could have subcontracts to foreign CROs, to foreign partners. This is something that is becoming much more of a risk in our current environment, and to be successful, and we've seen certain subs be discontinued because of foreign collaborations. This is something that you have to be aware of in the current environment. The company has to be 51% owned by a US citizen or permanent resident, and it has to be owned by an individual or small business and independently operated. So it has to be an individual. NIH, CDC, ARPA-E do allow 51% ownership by multiple VC firms, but those are the exceptions. Normally, it has to be owned by the individual. It has to be, so I think for some of you, you might get a little bit intimidated by this. What is a small business? A small business is defined as 500 or fewer employees, including affiliates. But you saw with the NSF, for example, majority of the grants are going to very early stage startups with less than 10 employees. You do have to have a principal investigator who is at least 50% or more an employee of the business at the time of award. So let's say if you have a postdoc who might become that particular person if it's awarded, they do not have to be drawing a salary from the company when you're applying for the SBIR STTR. Having said that, if you're applying for an STTR from the NIH, they do allow the university inventor, university PI, to also be the PI for the company if you founded the company. Another quick temperature check. I'm curious how many of you have considered forming a company? No one not interested, considering in the process, or have formed one? All right. But so far, I'm guessing that no one has, okay, someone's in the process. have a few people who are not interested, but I still have recommendations for you of how you can take advantage of the SBIR process.
But Dr. Petrova, those not interested might be some of us administrators.
Okay. Okay. All
Just-
right.
We're just participating in your survey. So,
But having said that, there are still opportunities in the program for those who don't want to do the startup life, because some of the things I show you right now might discourage you, and I hope they don't, because we have the support services and programs to get you through this. So this just gives you an idea. So after you formed a startup, so it looks like no one has formed a startup yet, and that is a separate lecture. You can come to us, separate workshop. You can come to us at Business and Entrepreneur Partnerships. We can walk you through the process, support you through the process. But after you form a company, there are a number of different required registrations, including your tax number, EIN, SBIR.gov, system of award management that you absolutely have to do, and then some that are dependent on the agency. And this is all after you have formed a company. And this particular process, if you look at all of these registrations, you're looking at something that is 2 to 3 months before you even submit your application that you want to get started, because some of these registrations do take up to 2 months to go through. So that's something for you to consider. But again, if you want to go down that path, we will support you as Business and Entrepreneur Partnerships. In addition to that, you do have to have the people, the facilities, and the actual product. So we already talked about the PI. Make sure that if you don't have the business expertise, that you have either advisors, mentors. If you need to do any kind of specific testing, you can work with contract research organizations. You have to have facilities, and these have to be company controlled. So I know sometimes you can rent space, but you can also rent space at an incubator. It has to be suitable for the work, and the work has to be done in the US. And at the end of the day, the important thing is you're not doing basic science. You have an innovation, an invention that is suitable for product development. So you're not really doing that exploratory testing work. And to quickly run through the elements of the proposal, the names, the order will differ by agency, but the main parts are kind of the same. The project summary abstract, you're familiar with this from other funding opportunities. Technical proposal and research strategy, which has to have that product development aspect to it, together with a work plan statement of work, which is often incorporated into that technical proposal. The commercialization plan that really looks at that customer segments, product market fit, regulatory, path to market, your budget justification, biographical sketches, resumes, facilities, capabilities, resources. What does your team, what do your partners look like? Letters of support, depending on agency, not all of them require or even allow them. Subaward information, and then certifications and disclosures. One very important thing, the company submits all of this. So all of the work that you are used to having SPS do for you, the company has to do all of that. On your end, SPS will only process the documents that relate to the university subaward, but the company has to do the submission. Having said that, there are firms that we work with that help with the writing and the submission process for especially first-time applicants. So while our office does not do the applications, the submission process, we help with the proposal, and we also connect you to resources that can help with that. Once it's submitted, the proposals will be subject to panels of both technical experts as well as commercialization experts who will look at the scientific and technical merit. They will also look at the business and partner qualifications and capacity facilities. Do you have the necessary resources that are, whether at your university partner or at the startup? And of course, the commercial potential, where they will look at, have you defined a very specific customer segment, market or clinical application, you have understanding of the regulatory process, and you have that mapped out plan of how you move that product towards the clinic or commercialization. One of the greatest success factors is partnering with a research institution. And this is why it's also important for you to know. It adds that technical expertise, and 50% of SBIR projects across all agencies have university involved. For NIH, it's 70%. For NSF, it's 80%. So one of the things to really highlight for you here is that you don't have to go down the startup, especially if you're looking for additional funding right now. You don't have to be a founder. You can be that subaward, that technical expert that supports startups, whether they are in our ecosystem or beyond across the United States, where you're getting a subaward from a startup. And so we've had this as well, where faculty have had those partnerships with startups, and we are also here if you're interested to help review applications for external companies if you're a subawardee on those, especially the commercialization section and your section if you are interested. I think in the interest of time, I just had an example of one company that has had a drug that was specifically approved for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and they had the expertise to develop it. But because of the immunotherapy additional applications that they had, such as asthma, MS, IBD, they partnered with a lot of different institutions as a company, research institutions, to really look at those other indications that they're not experts in. So again, this is both important for you to consider if you do become a founder. Do you have to seek additional expertise, additional partnerships for your startup? Or are there opportunities right now for you to partner with an existing startup and get a sub-award from them? And we definitely are here to help you explore that path as well and connect you to startups in that space. So to wrap things up, in terms of application resources, a couple of things that I suggest, this particular website, SBIR, so if you just look, I think you can Google SBIR awards or SBIR lookup. This is a database of all SBIRs that have ever been awarded. You can search by topic, by phase, by state, by agency to give you an idea of what has been awarded. You also can search SBIR.gov by topic to see all open solicitations. And again, you can see them, whether they're open, their contract, which agencies have them. So to give you an idea of what is open right now. If you do go down this route, if you do form a startup, if you are going through this, the SBIR.gov also has really in-depth tutorials on everything. So while we're here to support you, and I'll show you a couple of other resources, there are also really great resources available from SBIR.gov where they will walk you through all of the different agencies and considerations for each one. So to close this out, we are here to support you through a couple of things. If you have a new technology disclosure, a new technology, new invention, and are considering going down this path, you might have an industry partner, you're considering patenting, we're here with our technology transfer office. We can help you set up a company. So I think all of you have said that you're either in the process or are considering it. I don't think we had anybody who had a company. We're here to walk you through those steps, provide you the necessary resources. If you are pursuing an SBIR as a company or working with another company, we can do proposal review for you, and we specifically focus on the commercialization section. We, as well as the central office of the SUNY Research Foundation Venture Advisors, do also provide subsidized grant writing service providers services. So in these particular service providers can either review your grants, help you write them, and actually walk you through the application process. So in terms of the submission, all of those things that I said that SPS will not be doing for you, those service providers can help you with that. And both we at BEP here at UB, as well as the Central Research Foundation for SUNY office, do provide subsidized services for that. Of course, you're free to go out and find your own. And I do have to do also another shameless plug for that earlier stage of understanding your path to market and potential customer segments and commercialization potential, which is so important, not only for the SBIR program, but if you're looking to partner with industry and communicate with industry, we run the Innovation Core, the National Science Foundation Innovation Core, or I-Core program, which helps you connect with industry and figure out the market potential of your innovation. So if you're interested in that, and right now we are running we just finished a course that was focused on on oncology technologies, taking teams to the American Society for Clinical Oncology Conference to do that networking with both physicians and industry in the space. And we're doing another one for biotech, biotech innovators. We're taking, and I believe we have 6 UB out of 11 teams to the Bio International Convention in Boston next week to do that industry networking, again, in partnerships for innovators who have technologies that they developed at UB. And just as an overview, going back to that diagram, we at Business and Entrepreneur Partnerships really can support you across the entire journey with funding, mentors, and additional support programs. Thank you.
Dr. Petrova, your expertise is obvious. You got through so much information. So amazing presentation, and we're so appreciative. Do people want to put their hand up if they have a question? I don't feel the need to put it into the chat if anybody wants to just raise their hand and ask. You covered so much. And I would just say that the Office of the Vice President for Health Sciences is always working as much as we possibly can collaboratively with the VPR's office. And that's why we asked Dr. Petrova to come and give this presentation today, because we want to find some synergies and we want to make sure that we're supporting investigators as much as we possibly can. And she just presented some other absolutely amazing options. So thank you very much for doing this. As I mentioned in the chat, the presentation is available via the UB Health Sciences YouTube channel. And that's thanks to some students on our team who are savvy about these sorts of things. So when you go out there and if you look for the presentation or anything else, please subscribe. But Olga, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, because we're really here to support, regardless of the situation, but definitely in these uncertain times, to help navigate the additional funding mechanisms. And something that didn't touch on today, also interactions with industry and funding with industry. We're there to support that as well and make those connections. So really want to make sure that those innovations that are being developed at UB are continuing their development towards the clinic, towards the market, so that they can have the maximum benefits and impacts.
Olga, do you have any presentations that you also have coming up on different topics that you want to share with the group while we're here?
I don't believe so at this point. I can take a look and share them with you, but I don't think so, because everything is right now the innovation core, which was already a closed cohort.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. We truly appreciate everything that you did to prepare for this and share your knowledge.